Have you ever felt the nagging feeling that something wasn't right in your relationship? That's how it started for me. Small, barely noticeable things that didn't add up. But as I kept digging, I found more than I ever wanted to know. This is my story of betrayal, courage, and the moment I decided to turn the tables. I first noticed the little things, how she lingered on her phone, smiling to herself, happier yet oddly distant. Then came the late night calls and whispers, the quick, cautious glances, the brief flickers of guilt in her eyes. My gut told me something was wrong, but each time I tried to bring it up, she brushed it off, laughing at my paranoia. I didn't want to believe she was hiding something, but the doubts gnawed at me, growing stronger with each evasion, each brush off. Her answers became more rehearsed, her behavior more distant, and I could no longer ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. One night, unable to stand it any longer, I took a chance and checked her phone. There, in plain text, were the messages that confirmed my worst fears. Messages of love, of secrets I wasn't part of. The words stared back at me, cold and undeniable. It felt like a punch to the gut, but in some strange way, it also brought a grim clarity. The truth was right there. No more hiding, no more wondering. The betrayal was real. The reality of betrayal hit me hard, yet with it came clarity. Her love wasn't mine anymore, and perhaps it hadn't been for some time. At that moment, I understood that holding on would only deepen my pain. So I let her go, carrying a scar, but also a strange sense of freedom. Maybe love doesn't always end with answers, but with the courage to face the truth and walk away. One day I decided to trust my instincts. I began paying closer attention, checking bank statements, noticing the strange gaps in her schedule, even catching faint traces of a new cologne on her clothes. Each new clue stirred a storm of anger, sadness, and resentment within me. Yet I kept my silence, allowing her to believe she was fooling me. Every day became a painful reminder of what was slipping away, yet I didn't confront her. Instead, I let her live in the illusion of secrecy, all the while gathering the pieces of a story she didn't know I was seeing. Her betrayals piled up, each one cutting deeper than the last. Yet I remained still, somehow gaining strength from her underestimation of me. Finally, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my peace. The truth had been laid bare, and the weight of it no longer left room for uncertainty or hesitation. When I confronted her, I wasn't seeking answers or apologies. The questions had been answered long ago, and the apologies would never be enough to erase the hurt. I had come to realize that staying would only keep me trapped in a cycle of pain. So I was ready to walk away, leaving behind the love that had soured, the promises that had been broken, and the lies that had poisoned everything. In that moment, I chose myself. I chose to preserve my dignity, to heal, and to move forward. It was hard leaving the life we had built together, but I understand now that sometimes the strongest choice is simply choosing yourself over the hurt. I walked away with a heart full of scars, but also a quiet strength, knowing that the road ahead would lead to something better, something real. I had let her go, and in doing so, I had freed myself. I decided it was time to turn the tables. I didn't want to lose my dignity by confronting her without proof, so I began gathering evidence. Playing the part of the oblivious husband, I casually asked her about her day, listening intently as she wove her stories, all the while piecing together the lies beneath her words. I watched carefully, noting inconsistencies, small details that didn't add up, all while keeping my suspicions to myself. I was methodical, careful not to raise any suspicion. Every conversation, every subtle moment, became a piece of the puzzle I was putting together. I documented everything I found, messages, receipts, and anything that confirmed what I already suspected. Each new detail felt like another confirmation of the truth I feared. I wasn't looking for a confrontation just yet. I needed the full picture, every shred of evidence before I made my move. Strangely, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't the fool anymore. When the time came, I would confront her with everything I knew, and she would have nowhere to hide. This time I would be ready. Each new detail brought the truth into sharper focus. The unexplained expenses, her frequent absences, even the messages I'd managed to glimpse when she wasn't looking. At first they seemed like coincidences, But one by one, they added up. Soon there was no doubt left. What I had suspected all along was confirmed. The gut feeling I'd been ignoring was no longer something I could deny. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, each revelation a painful reminder that the woman I thought I knew had been hiding a part of herself from me. And as the truth unfolded, it wasn't just the evidence that hurt, it was the realization that I had been living in a lie. With the truth in hand, I felt strangely calm. Confronting her wasn't about accusations or anger anymore. It was about closure. When I finally showed her the evidence, she couldn't deny it, and I could see the shock in her eyes, realizing I hadn't been so blind after all. I walked away with my head held high, dignity intact, knowing that I'd regained control of my life and my future. Right as I started to piece things together, I realized how many of us ignore those gut feelings out of love or fear. Have you ever had to make a tough call in a relationship? Comment below if you've ever faced something similar or had to make a life-changing decision. One evening, when she least expected it, I laid out everything I'd uncovered. The look on her face, shock, guilt, disbelief, spoke volumes, more than any denial ever could. She stammered at first, fumbling for words, trying to scramble her way out. But I was calm, unwavering. As she shifted from denial to explanation, I knew it was too late. I had caught her in the lie, and now the truth was laid bare between us. There was no turning back, no more pretending. The facade had shattered, and the silence that followed spoke louder than anything either of us could say. Her attempts to justify herself were weak, her words stumbling over the undeniable weight of her actions. The excuses she offered fell flat, failing to cover the depth of betrayal that hung in the air. For the first time, I saw her not as the woman I loved, but as someone who had chosen deceit over honesty. And in that moment it became clear. No amount of explanation could erase the hurt, and no apology could undo what had been done. At that moment I realized that I no longer needed her explanations or apologies. The truth had already been revealed, and the betrayal was clear. As silence filled the room, I saw the realization in her eyes, that I was no longer the man she thought she could deceive. And as I walked away, there was no more anger, only a quiet certainty that I had finally taken control of my own story. At that moment, I saw her for who she was, and she finally saw me as more than the oblivious partner she'd taken me for. Her silence grew, a quiet acceptance settling over her as she realized just how deeply she had underestimated me. I felt a strange calm, almost detached, as I watched her struggle with the consequences. There was no need for anger or accusations. I'd already moved past the pain. As I turned to leave, I left behind the broken trust and the hollow apologies, knowing I deserved more than she could ever offer. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Stepping into a future, I was ready to rebuild on my terms. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, I told her I was done. Despite how deeply I had loved her, I realized that trust was the foundation we had lost, and without it, our marriage had crumbled beyond repair. Saying goodbye wasn't easy. It felt like releasing years of memories, dreams, and promises that once held so much meaning. But I had come to understand that holding on would only mean sacrificing my self-respect. At that moment, I knew that love alone couldn't rebuild what had been broken. The pain was immense, but the clarity was undeniable. I couldn't stay in a relationship that no longer honored me. Walking away was the hardest choice I'd ever made, but it was the one that would allow me to heal, reclaim my dignity, and rebuild my life on my terms. As I left, there was no bitterness, only a quiet resolve. I had loved her deeply, but now it was time to love myself more. Walking away was a hard decision, yet it brought me a strange sense of peace. I had faced the truth, gathered my strength, and reclaimed control over my life. I'd turned the tables, no longer the one caught off guard, but the one who chose freedom over deception. In the end, I realized that love without trust isn't truly love at all. It's a hollow connection, fragile and fleeting. By letting go, I preserved the one thing no one could ever take from me, my dignity. The choice to walk away wasn't about anger or revenge, but about protecting myself from further pain. As I stepped away, I felt lighter, as if a weight I had carried for far too long had finally been lifted. I was free, ready to begin a new chapter in my life, one built on honesty, healing, and respect I'd finally reclaimed for myself. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to face it, knowing I had the strength to rebuild and move forward. Walking away was the hardest choice I'd ever made, but it was also the most empowering. Sometimes the best way to heal is to let go of what no longer values you. Thanks for following my story. And remember, if you're going through something similar, trust your instincts. Stay true to yourself.